and today we have with us Reverend Carol Saunders for a guest in Compassion in Action. She's the founder of the Spiritual Forum podcast, prayer and retreat ministry, writer of the Wolf and the Lamb blog, a unity minister, and organizer of the Whole Planet Spirituality Forum and Retreat. Hi, Reverend Carol. Thanks for coming today. We're so glad you're with us.
I apologize for coming on late.
Oh, we're just glad you're here. Well, first, I'd like to ask you a bit about your journey in becoming an animal advocate vegan. How did that start and when, and what was your motivation?
I was a late bloomer. I mean, I became vegetarian when I was 15. Took me a long time to become vegan. And I think I awakened to advocacy kind of late. I think it honestly happened at a writing retreat where I was supposed to write, my own book, and I couldn't come up with anything. And I just felt like the presence of like the Fillmores, Charles and Myrtle Fillmore, calling me forward to really speak about the animals. So that's really kind of how it started. I don't remember when that was, 2008, something like that, 2010. And then, get led by spirit and met Lisa Levinson and met Judy. I put forth a proposal to do a seminar at a unity convention to resurrect Charles Fillmore's teachings on animals and ethical vegetarianism, and it got accepted. This is like in 2017 or 18 or so. And that was when I really first kind of really got myself in front of people in unity, that this was my passion, my topic, to resurrect these teachings. From the pulpit, I would bring up vegan activism kind of in a softball way. And I would have Earth Day potlucks and things like that. But I really wasn't a hard hitter from the pulpit. But people knew I had a lot of sidebars about the animals and about compassion and whatnot. But that's kind of something that was kind of growing through me about how to really find my voice as a minister.
Beautiful. You mentioned Charles and Myrtle Fillmore, the founders, and I know part of your work also includes the rebirth of vegan values to the Unity Church. How are you doing that within the community, and how are you extending it beyond the Unity group?
It's a really good question. The Unity group is a hard nut to crack. It shouldn't be, but it is. Anybody who knows anything about Unity, our founders in the early 19th century, this is actually the early 20th century, excuse me, early 1900s, they had awakened to how important our relationship with animals was to our ability to experience universal love, have world peace, spiritually develop, and live ethically. And they taught this, and they had, a vegetarian restaurant and a food company, and they bound their Bibles in non-leather and all these really, really, really progressive things back then. It was a big deal in Unity in the early 1900s. And we've kind of fallen away from that. So I table there every year at the convention. I have this retreat to try to plant these seeds and get it back out into the churches and let people remember where from whence we came. Now, how do I extend that outward? The retreat that I have at Unity Village, I know you're going to ask me about that later. Everyone's invited. Everyone's invited. We want everyone to come, and so that's one way to kind of get the message of out there. Also, my podcast. I've got one coming out tomorrow. You guys are going to love it. It's called Animals and Christian Ethics, and it's with Dr. Lisa Kemmerer. And about every other month or so, I have a vegan message on my podcast. It's not a vegan podcast, but I bring in the message, bring in a guest about every other month or so to make sure that that's part of the spiritual path.
I love that, Carol. And, I'm finding out the older I get how important it is to be vegan in a non-vegan world. So the fact that your podcast embraces a lot of humanity and not just vegans, I think is a good way to spread the vegangelist message. Let's talk about that gathering. That's coming in October, I believe on the 19th to the 22nd. And our Victoria Moran said that attending that event spoke to her heart in a very unique way. So can you tell us about what's so special about this event?
Yeah, that's a really good question. First, I just want to say to anybody who's out there who's thinking about coming, you can spend 3 days with Renee King Sonnen and with Victoria and with Reverend Sarah and some really awesome people, Silas Rao. I think because it's spiritually focused and it's also really about vegan values. And like last year, 20% of our attendees weren't vegan at all. And we saw their hearts open during the 3.5 days we were together. And we're also accepting of everybody. So we invite curious omnivores. I know that's offensive to some people, but we want them to come. We want them to hear this message. We want them to see how loving that we are. And so we're infusing this time where we have great speakers and spiritual practices and music. And I think what happens is we close it with this an amazing ritual, but I think what happens is our hearts really open. And this year, our theme is called Peace Begins With Me. So it really is about how do we, as vegan advocates, how do we, as pre-vegans, whoever we are attending, how do we find this inner alignment so that we are peaceful people, so that when we bring this message into the world, we're really, really effective. Our message is a message of peace and love and harmony. So if we're not feeling it in here, and if we're feeling a lot of angst, then it's really hard for us to be effective as a peace and harmony and love movement. So I think that's what makes it special. It's the people, the connection, the love, the collaboration, and the spiritual practices. Because it is a spiritual practice, right? Veganism is a spiritual practice, and we really honor that.
That's exceptional. I do think Reverend Sarah and I have talked about this before, that vegan can be a term that doesn't feel inclusive to a lot of people. And I love that you arranged this event so people's hearts open and we welcome everyone. And what Dave was saying earlier, that as vegans, we start out loving animals, but we need to love humans very much so.
It's so important.
I'm sorry.
It's so important. I'm just saying that if we can't say we're about love unless we do everything we can to love everyone,
Yes, it's so important to remember, and harder for some of us. You mentioned also, well, I know you're a Unity minister, and you spread a lot of the spirit of compassion almost 100% through your work. And we see that in your spiritual forum and your podcast and your prayer and your retreat ministry. How did the development of that ministry of compassion come about?
Well, that's a really good question. I do think it kind of comes about from deciding to live a life of integrity, like either you're going to be it or just talk about it. And I just think it's really important to share that the animals. I think it's really important to. So first, I'm a minister. Part of my job is bring people to God, okay, or bring people to their spiritual center. And how can you do that if you just cut off so much of creation? So I think to me it was just really about awakening to who am I, and who am I in all of creation, and what is my life about, So part of life is speaking the truth. Part of it is acting, your the truth. And part of it is dreaming about the world that we can create. So I think all of it just kind of came about by stepping into what Spirit was asking me to do. I don't know if that makes sense to a lot of people, if you haven't really felt a calling. But when you feel it inside, like this is what you're being asked to do, then it's a matter of just saying yes. And then knowing that once you say yes, it's kind of like the Red Sea parts. People show up and things start happening. And then, you step into, this is my purpose. I don't know if that answers your question or not, but I don't know how you can be in ministry and compassion not be a big part of your ministry.
It does. And that what you said about the calling reminds me of the great master of Santmat, Shan Singji, who said that once you hear about the path, you can never really turn your back on it.
You
So,
can't. And once you
yeah,
say yes, you're on a path. It's like getting on a roller coaster you can't get off of, but it's a fun ride.
we're happy you're on it. I have one last question when I like to ask all of our guests. What's the one thing we can all do immediately, do today after we leave this meeting to make the world around us a more compassionate place?
Yeah. Okay, so just really quickly, the reason I wasn't on earlier is because I was at a kind of memorial service celebration of life for a friend of mine that passed. And I'm bringing this up because I didn't find out about this until Friday night. And I jumped through hoops to make sure that my husband and I were here. And I'm bringing this up because I think the one thing we can do is to say yes to every opportunity to connect, to be with people, to not say, oh, that's too hard, or oh, I'll see them another time. These are times where we must be in relationship and reach out across the aisle to people who we don't like, people who we don't understand, people we disagree with, people who we've had arguments with, or people who we're just disconnected from. I think the one thing we can do to make the world a more compassionate place, other than give up dairy, is to just say yes and to connect with absolutely every opportunity we have.
Oh, Carol, that's not only pearls of wisdom, those are diamonds. They're sparkling. Thank you so much for being with us. And I, for one, will be listening to Animals and Christian Values on your podcast on
Oh,
Monday.
it's a hoot.
Can't wait. Looking
There's a lot
forward
of
to
laughing. It's fun.
it. Thank you for being with us.
Thank you, everyone.